Well, good morning, Christ Holdfast friends. I'm Bruce Hillman. I'm pastor at Hillside Lutheran Brethren Church in northern New Jersey, and today's Thursday, and we're going to be finishing up chapter 9 in Ecclesiastes. Today I'll be reading verses 11 through 18, and this is what it says. Again I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. For man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare, so the children of man are snared at an evil time, when it suddenly falls upon them. I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with a few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. The words of the wise in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Well, in the last few sections or chapters, he's really tried to stress to us three things, Koheleth, the writer of this book. The first one is that humanity is always after the search for gain, always out for more, for control and for power. This has been a theme since we saw in chapter 1 of the book. 2, he's talked about how God is the one who ordains the times. God is ultimately the one in charge. The wise know what time they're in, but they can't by their own manipulation bring about a certain time. And then 3, that life is characteristically just unfair. That is the nature of things. And you see that with, again, I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to all. So, one of the things that I want to just take a parenthetical for a second on is, it can seem as we read Ecclesiastes and as we read Koheleth, that he's kind of almost a fatalist or a determinist. And he thinks that just God is a great puppeteer, a puppet master who's kind of ordering all things. And that would be a bit unfair of a reduction to have of Koheleth. He's not a fatalist and he's not a determinist because he wants to show that wisdom really is valuable. But he has an anxiety. And that anxiety is that we will take the wisdom literature, things like Psalms and Proverbs, and we will turn those into kind of a secret knowledge on how to get ahead in life. And he's very anxious about this. He wants to show us what wisdom really can do and what wisdom can't do, the limits of wisdom. Wisdom doesn't give someone a leg up or gain. He's been talking about this for a while, right? And this is hard for us, I think, because if you are someone who sees life as operating a particular certain way, or it should or it ought work a certain way, and then it doesn't work that sort of way, you'll find yourself getting bitter, you'll find yourself getting depressed, becoming angry, maybe even becoming anxious, because the world just isn't fair. It just doesn't work like algebra, where you plug in things on this side of the equation and then something else happens on the other side of the equation. So Koheleth is a very deep realist, and what he wants to say is that wisdom's profit, the goodness of wisdom, is not that it gets you gain, but wisdom is still good. How then is wisdom good? Well, wisdom is good because it is needed, it is necessary for all of us in our lives to flourish. In order to have any real good and to have life and to have safety and to have joy, you need wisdom. But wisdom doesn't guarantee, okay, that all these things will happen. But you need to have wisdom if they're going to happen at all. And so wisdom is better. It's the best thing, maybe. I think he even would say wisdom will increase your chances of a sort of success, but it's not a promise. It's not a gain. So, in the first 2 verses, he talks about this unfairness of life. And then he says, for man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare. So the children of man are snared at an evil time, when it suddenly befalls them. Again, God is in control of the times. And so we think that if we do the right things, if we do the things that we are supposed to do, if we follow the rules, if we make the sacrifices, if we do the things we should, that we will get a guarantee. And we won't. So let's pause for a second and just kind of do a self-evaluation of our lives. Are we doing this? Are we looking at reality? Are we looking at our lives as a sort of entitlement? You know, we're owed certain things because we do certain things. And we have to be careful with that. Kohelet says, be careful, that's going to lead to a lot of trouble. And yet at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that if we live life a certain way, there should be certain advantages. So he's going to try to navigate this. It's a little bit messy, but he's going to try to navigate it in the second part of the devotional today, which is verses 13 through the end. And there he shows us a parable. He tells us a parable of a city. And this city is besieged by a great king. And obviously the situation gets desperate, and the king who's in the city isn't able to defend it. And in the desperation, they find this poor man. Someone they would never listen to normally, someone who they would despise, but because of their desperate situation, they're going to listen to him. And he happens to be not just a poor man, but a wise poor man. And he doesn't tell us how, but using his wisdom, the poor wise man saves the city from this powerful king who has besieged it. But then we hear something that is quite unfair. Let me read it for you. He says, but there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city, yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. So this guy saves the city, and yet he is despised at the end. Now, we don't have all the details, so I'm sure after the city was saved, they gave him the equivalent to the key to the city, and they thanked him and everything else. But he went back to being a poor man, and he went back to being despised. And I'm reminded of a real story that has similar parallels to this, not just a parable, that took place during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Vasily Andro, I'm not good with Russian, Alexandrovich Arkhipov, something like that. He was the commander of the flotilla of the Russian submarines and ships during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was actually second in command on the sub that he served. And he is sometimes credited with saving the world from nuclear annihilation. And the reason for this is that, just like many military systems with nuclear war, you needed to have the 3 top officers consent to firing nuclear weapons. And the Soviets actually wanted to fire nuclear torpedoes during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The order was given, and 2 of the senior officers agreed. But this man did not. Second in command on the sub, but he was technically the commander of the whole fleet. And he, in his wisdom, said, no, I do not consent. We will not launch the nuclear weapons. And Secretary McNamara, who is the Secretary of Defense afterwards, has credited this man with saving the world from nuclear destruction, because he had the wisdom to see. But this man, when he returned home, was despised. In fact, I have a quote from his superior. His superior said, it would have been better if you had went down with your ship than to have returned home. So the wisdom of this man was despised. So these types of stories that Kohelet is telling, they still have effects in the world today. All right. So what does that mean, though, for all of us today? Are we going to end on just this pessimistic note? No, we're not. Here's what I would say, taking a kind of New Testament approach, trying to add our Christian theology into this Old Testament book. I think Kohelet, the writer of this book, is always at odds. He's always anxious to find what you can be certain about. This is something that he seems to struggle with. What can I know for sure? And usually the things that he says you can know for sure are not very nice. They're negative things. You know that death is coming for sure. You know that God is in control of the times. You know that you can't control things. There are all these types of negative things. And he's always seems like he's searching for something positive to grab onto. And where he grabs onto is the certainty that God is sovereign and that he is to be feared. But we can actually, because we're further down the timeline of Revelation, we can actually find some amazing things here. And I would say this. The gospel of Jesus Christ, the promises that are found in God's Word, the sacraments, they offer us a certain type of certainty about the God who controls the times. And even though the relationship between God's sovereignty, okay, and human responsibility or human freedom has never truly been completely figured out by the church. We don't know the complete relationship between God's sovereignty, his overwhelming sovereignty, and our human freedom. That's always kind of trying to be figured out. Why that, though, and there seems to, it's important to say, there is both. There is both. God is fully sovereign, and yet God, there is such a thing as human freedom. But where we draw those lines is not always easy. And there are even though God is completely sovereign, there appears to be things that God cannot do. So God cannot sin. God cannot lie. God cannot go back on his word. So can God do anything? Well, it seems like he can't do anything. But yet he's fully sovereign. So these are all theological conundrums that are quite fun to get into, but we won't get into them now. But there are some things that we can know for certain about the God who controls the times, and therefore is the God involved in our life, in who we participate with. And that is the God who has given us his Son, Jesus Christ, who has given us the gospel, who has given us the cross. And through these actions, God has showed us how much God really loves us, and that our future, whatever that will be, is a future that's caught up in him and in his promises and in his coming kingdom and in his goodness. There's a part in Paul, and I'll close with this, in 1 Corinthians, this is my favorite Old Testament book. 1 Corinthians is my favorite New Testament book. And in 1 Corinthians, Paul says that the message of the cross, the gospel, the good news about Jesus, is foolishness to those who are perishing. That is, to those who don't believe it. It just seems ridiculous that we would believe in a seditious man who was killed on a cross, and in him we have life. But Paul says that God uses the foolishness of the cross to shame the wisdom of the wise, or the wisdom of this world. Which is an odd way of saying that Christianity has its own sort of wisdom in it that the world perceives as foolishness. And that wisdom is best demonstrated in the paradox of the cross. That there's hope in life, that you lose your life to find it, all this sort of stuff. And so what I would ask you to maybe take home with you this morning is that life isn't fair, but we have a God who, using unfairness, has set us free. His Son, who committed no sin, who knew no sin, came and in the incarnation and took on flesh and died for us. And we get grace, so we don't get what we deserve. So there's a good side to unfairness that God has brought into our lives. And he has given us wisdom in order to navigate through the times. When we get into chapter 10, he goes into some miscellaneous ways that wisdom is useful and appropriate, and we'll go over those. But for now, I just hope you take with you that God is the God who gives you the cross. He is the God who oversees the times. He is the God who gives you the gospel. And therefore, he is the God who you could put your trust in today, because he works all things out for good. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening. We have some other contributors who are on during the week. I hope you can turn in for them. And I will see you next Thursday as we branch into chapter 10. Take care.